wrong.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Today I bring you the much anticipated, long-awaited collaboration with Different Dimension Dreamer. This will be a masterclass in DDD deck theory and deck building by Different Dimension Dreamer himself. As usual, my video will be structured. Part 1, the core, the general characteristics and game plan of the deck. Part 2, the most bare bones version of the deck possible. Regardless of how you want to build the deck, what are the cards you absolutely have to include and at what ratios? And finally, in part 3, we will go over some more specific questions as well as talking about the current format all the way up until Burst Protocol with the long-awaited DDD Sage King Alfred. So now I bring you Different Dimension Dreamer. Enjoy. Let's start with the core, the general characteristics of DDD. Normally, when I do an introduction to something, I try to go over the theory of the deck or the game plan of the deck. And I think we can assume that people already know what the card text says for DDD. But what would you say
Yeah.
this deck is even trying to do?
So generally, the deck is like when we go way back, it is a very combo heavy deck, right? So it intends to go first so that it sets up an unbreakable board that hopefully wins the game on the spot. So it really feels like, I would say, like not not after the support, but before the support, like a very combo slop deck from the 2020s with like an Emancipator or something, right? So you generally want to spam out a lot of negates so that the opponent struggles to play through, and then you just hope to win the game from then onwards. But after the support, we actually could optionally decide to include new layers to it, right? So you could, for example, introduce a trap contract. This is not mandatory, but some people do it, like me, where I know for like the format that I am in, that if I have this trap contract, that people usually don't have any response to it. So if you, for example, know the trap contract Eternal Darkness, it's basically reading like a very busted floodgate if you're not playing Link. And that is why I would say it is like the usual run-of-the-mill combo heavy deck with some esoteric naming choices, I would say, or naming conventions, because they are all leaning towards like historical figures and scientists and stuff. So yeah, that's basically how I would describe the deck and what the game plan is.
So I noticed like when I first got into DDD was around the time that Gilgamesh came out, because I liked the deck before, but I didn't really understand how to play it. And since then, just looking at a deck list on its face, there's a huge difference in the cards that are, 3-ofs versus not included at all. Do you think like there's been a substantial change in the identity of the deck, also in terms of the strengths and weaknesses, not just the game plan? Like how much of a difference is there from, let's say, like the release of Gilgamesh to right now? Is it more or less the same deck?
It at heart, it really does feel like the same deck, but it just I wouldn't say it pilots differently. It still feels how wait, let me think what kind of metaphor would be fitting to that. It's like you have like this one, I don't know, one favorite food that you eat. And the thing is, the next time when a different cook makes the food, it tastes kind of similar and it's like very nostalgic, but kind of different. And it's the same after the support. So it, in essence, feels the same in its complexity, but in its general game sense and what it tries to achieve, it still is the same. With the added strength that because of the new support and the better card quality of the support, the deck in itself became way more resilient than it used to be, especially compared to after Battle of Chaos or after Gilgamesh, right? So it really feels great to be a DDD player this year and at the beginning of next year, I would say. So yeah.
So, okay, that's a good segue to talk a little bit about some of the maybe like choke points or primary issues that you would face with this deck. Because before, when I was playing just on the release of Gilgamesh, oftentimes what would happen is maybe the opponent has something like an imperm on the Gilgamesh, and I don't have maybe exactly the extender that I need to continue playing, and it felt like it was too obvious of a choke point. So these days now that you have so many more options, like there's the Zero Doom Queen Machinex and also the Dark Contract for the Zero King, those cards in particular, but whatever else, all the other things that have changed. How would you think about the choke points of the deck right now? Like in principle, what are the worst things to play against? And if you want, you can also put it in the context of the current format, but I'm also just thinking like in principle, where would this deck struggle?
Yes, because like I just thought back of like the most recent tournament that I attended. Like the deck list that you currently see is the charity deck list event that I attended to with like it's not it was like not that crowded, but like we did like 5 rounds of Swiss or something, and I placed the second. But the thing is, the most hilarious part was a lot of people weren't really in the know, I would say, of how to choke point the deck because they only were used to imperming the Gilgamesh, and they just hoped and prayed that that would be enough. But after the support, it clearly wasn't. And you already mentioned one choke point. One huge choke point is actually the Zirican contract. So if you really want to skill check a DDD player, if you're like up against one, you basically throw an Ash or an Impulse against the Zirican contract and just see what happens. If they know what to do, they usually can pile it into like a semi okayish board that they can end on. And if they don't know, well, they end on basically nothing, and they might even have clogged one of their pen zones so that they can or really struggle to do a follow-up play after that if you don't kill them. So I would say the choke points really shifted with the new support. The most interesting part is that, for example, in the decklist that you currently see, I've included authors. Now, some deck lists decided to cut out authors. You can do that, but when you cut him out, especially if you are still not in the phase where you are in burst protocol without Alfred, basically, in these cases, if they banish your lands, you will have a very hard time. Simply for the reason that if they banish lands and you don't have an Authoress, you don't have any tuner left in your deck, which means they cut off your Clovis and secret lines completely. And that means that you don't have any fallback if, for example, a Necro gets banished afterwards and you don't know what to do. So it really is dependent on the deck building choice of the deck as well.
Okay, so Orthros is one of the very specific cards that I definitely wanted to bring up, but this is another perfect segue into the next section, which is what is the absolute core bare bones of this type of deck? Because I think normally when people are learning a deck, which is one of the main focuses on my channel, is either people who are learning a deck for the first time or already advanced players who are trying to get into a specific deck because they just don't know how to play that type of deck. If you're just looking at how to build the deck from the ground up, I'll bring up the bare bones list that you've shared with me now. Why do you think that there's certain cards that deserve to be in this list, and why it's certain ratios as opposed to others? Because for example, we have 000 Doom Queen Machinex. You have included in this list the Scale Surveyor and Not Count. I guess you can take this wherever you want to go, but how would you approach thinking about the core of DDD to start with?
That is a very important question. I think a lot of people already have like a certain idea on what they want to end on, and that's like the best direction to go with, I would say. Like if you want to build a DDD deck just for your format, you have to ask yourself what format you're playing in first, and then afterwards what your game plan is. Because as I've already mentioned, DDD can be very flexible, even though it is xenolocked. That means that if you decide to, for example, play the Four Kings setup with the Eternal Darkness, then you automatically have to include the Small Caesar and the second Gilgamesh so that you can dump the Small Caesar to have the Trap Contract Surge off. But if you say you only need the Four Kings, you don't need them. You can cut them out for example, more slots as like super poly targets, right? That would be an option as well. Or you could go overboard and say, no, I want to have even more. I want to have a bright Armageddon, or I want to have a dark Armageddon, or I want to have both. This is all possible, like all in the realms of the archetype after the support. But you really have to focus on what the format requires you to do and what is enough for you to win the game. And with that, you can reduce the core to your liking. And in the list that I've shown you, you've already mentioned that I've cut out Count Surveyor, for example, and Count Surveyor is a very controversial card as well. I will get to that later, but in general, my core always includes a certain base of hand trap resilience. So, as you have already mentioned, I have 3 Doom Queen, 3 Kepler, and 3 Gate. Kepler and Gate are basically the run of the mill starters that you would imagine in the DDD deck. But Queen is not only a good starter, but she's the best extender as well. Meaning that if you have, for example, a hand where you open with Kepler and Queen, Kepler can eat any kind of hand trap with its one card combo line, you have to obviously modify it a bit, and queen will save the day somehow. And that is like how strong and or how queen should be used actually, in my opinion, if you open both of them. So that's why these three are like no-brainers that have to be maxed out at all costs in any bare bones deck. The other ones are mandatory engine requirements, which would be Copernicus right now, Necroslime, and Lance. These three are like mandatory together with Zero King contract. The other thing now, which is super interesting, are the two extenders, one Griffin and two Scale, and the pen scale Ragnar, or the pen monster Ragnar, which is more used as a pen scale. So the interesting part about the extenders is the extenders themselves, they facilitate the opening place so that you can do your one card combo. So you have to at least include one Griffin, right? But as I've mentioned, in my bare bones core deck list, I would say the most important part is to have a baseline of hand trap resilience. So if you don't have Griffin and Scale, I would say you have a harder time to play around very common hand traps. For example, Droll. If you don't have Scale in your deck and you get Drolls, that's gonna be a very rough time to navigate against because Droll is a very good enabler in these type of circumstances, so that you can, for example, bounce back a Griffin from the set scales of Gilgamesh to have another resource without adding it to your hand, and then just going off with the rank 4 place. And that's why I've included scale. I've included two scales and two griffins because in my lines, or in the lines that I'm currently working for my upcoming video that took way too long, by the way, is that the the two of them are always required somehow in some way, shape, or form when you get hand trapped with like very heavy hitter choke point hand traps like Ash on the Zero King contract or Impulse on the Zero King contract, which is why I decided to include both of them because they're very, very much needed in these cases, or like a Bestial on a Lance, even though I don't have authors, as you can see in the main deck list. And now with like Ragnarok, for example, the Ragnarok part is the most interesting part in my opinion because if you see how the OCG plays DDD, the OCG players love Thomas. They love Thomas to bits, and I certainly get it because you can approach the deck building in the sense of you play it with Thomas and you don't have to worry about the K9 lines because the Thomas lines enable you to play around K9 Izuna better. But Ragnarok is better in general against like more common hand traps that basically killed our deck, like Veilers or Imperms against Gilgamesh or Nibs, or for example. I mean, yeah, sure, Thomas can have some nib plays as well, but that you get the gist. So yeah, that's basically how I approach the deck list. And now to the part where you see the other optional cards in the side. I was thinking about including authors in the main, and I have thought about it a very long time, like at least a month, because I really struggle to actually remove him from my main deck list because authors has such a great utility as a second tuner and as a level 4 body that can pop something, right? But I decided to move him out to the side because I have noticed that with Alfred, you have way better resilience now. If you get Bestial, for example, on your Necro or your Lance, you can still recover from that and set up almost your full board afterwards, even without the authors, which makes it great. You can now play other cards which are high quality, and that is the reason why I decided to side him out in this time. Another thing would be Count. Count is controversial because if you do like static theory crafting, I would say, the thing with Count is that you don't really notice its strengths. Count in itself really shows its strengths when you actually have real matchups and when you have to play through a very big board with a very engine heavy hand because sometimes you will not open the perfect 3 engine card and 2 non-engine card hand, but sometimes it's like 4 engine cards or only engine cards. And in these cases, having one count in your deck that can actually special something by pitching something is great, even though you might not have the best pitching targets, right? But it's still very awesome to have, but not mandatory, as the core itself in like self-contained as of what it tries to do is already achieving it with the things that I've shown you in the deck list. So yeah, that's everything that I could say about it, I think.
So I have one more question about this bare bones deck list before we move on to the next part. And just to give some
Sure.
context, if you look back to a deck like Ryzeal when that first came out, the quality of the cards in that deck, more or less, at least the cards that you used to play like X or Sword or whatever, were so high quality that they were all kind of starter extender cards. And so many people would say if you don't have three hand traps, you might as well not even bother because it's not going to do anything. You're just losing the cards that are acting as hand traps, and they're just going to put other bodies on the board and full combo anyhow. But when you look at a deck like DDD, it feels like the card quality is much more mixed in the sense that there is something like Doom Queen Machinex that you mentioned is a starter and also an extender. But then there are other cards that are either just starters or maybe just extenders. But from your description, it sounds like you would always want to have an extender like Griffin or Scale Surveyor. So my question is, why wouldn't you max out on as many copies of those cards as possible if you don't have the same number of super high quality starter extenders that another deck like the old Ryzeal used to have?
That's an excellent question. So the thing that I have asked myself was exactly that one. The reason why I didn't max out Griffin and Scale in this context is because you can run, for example, something like Dark Spirit's Mastery, right? So you could argue to include Dark Spirit's Mastery as a starter searcher or like an extended searcher for Doom Queen. For example, if you have like you open with a Kepler or a Gate, and you argue that you don't want to use a Griffin or a Scale for that, but Doom Queen is your best extender, you can search more Doom Queens for it. And that's why I wanted to give the people the freedom to decide on whether they want to have more Doom Queens as extenders or the Griffins or Scales. Because Doom Queen in itself has like a higher card quality. And yeah, that's that. But the issue at hand, as you already described, is that the card quality by the of like each card is not as high as the ones of like the meta decks from back then or right now as of currently. So they don't really stack nicely on top of each other like other decks would do.
Is it
And
not
that's
possible
like
to have just before you change the subject here? Is it not possible with like
sure.
Dark Spirit's Mastery in particular that you would just play more of those cards, or is there a conflict where if you were to draw both Doom Queen and Dark Spirit's Mastery, maybe you wouldn't want to search Ragnarok or whatever the other targets are because you don't want to search it and have it in your hand, or like is that a card you would have to
Exactly.
play at one?
Exactly. So Dark Spirit's Mastery, in my opinion, or in my play testing, every time when I open Doom Queen and Dark Spirit's Mastery, it really it felt awful because the only thing that you could then search is a Count Surveyor or a Ragnarok, and both are not really great things to search off. Like, okay, Count can be argued, but Ragnarok would usually be something that you want to scale from Gilgamesh's effect and not having it in the hand. And in these cases, you really have to decide on, okay, do I want to risk on opening this kind of hand that really does nothing for extension, or do I want to have maybe more Griffins or Scales in hand so that I can actually do more things with Doom Queen plus Griffin or like Doom Queen plus Scale? It is up to personal preference. I mean, there are people out there that want or like love Doom Queen to bits, and they max out on Dark Spirit's Mastery and would just cut out like Scales and Griffins to the bare bones so that you only play one or like two or maybe even only one Griffin. That's certainly possible, but in my play style and how I would play it, so that the I would say the mix of cards stacks better, I would try to max out the usual extenders more.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So let me ask you a little bit about current format and matchup spread. So I'm gonna before we go into the burst protocol stuff, just quickly pull back up the current format list. And
Mhm.
what do you think about, I guess, two things. The first is if you are going to, let's say, a larger event, even if you're not a super competitive player and you're mostly expecting a meta matchup spread, How do you compare playing DDD in that context versus if you're going to a locals, which I think is a lot of people, and you could be playing against anything at all? Like, how different is the deck in those two spheres, and what do you think about the matchup spread?
In these cases, I think the non-engine itself will be shaped like is shaped more in the deck list, but compared to the engine is already fixed in my opinion. So usually, if you look at the most recent um, deck lists of DDD in regionals or YCSs, it has like a pretty cookie cutter ratio already with with the three stars maxed out, so Kepler, Doom Queen, and Gate. But usually they play three scales and three Griffin as well, maybe sometimes two scales and one count at least, and like all the other mandatory engine pieces, and usually in authors as well. You can argue that if you suspect the format, as I already as I already mentioned, if you suspect that the format plays a lot of bestials, for example, if you expect that there are a lot of branded players that play bestials or like some other bestial piles, then an authors would be mandatory. But anything aside from that is basically non-engine. You have to do the right non-engine calls. Maybe you could argue to, for example, switch out to another trap contract that is more suitable for the format that you are in. For example, right now, Eternal Darkness is great, right? Because it hits Yummy and K9 pretty well. Draco's here not so much because they confuse from hand, but still, they can sometimes struggle too. And yeah, the thing is very format dependent, I think. And speaking of the format, if you look at my deck list from my charity event, I, for example, knew that there were a lot of people that will play Mitsu because in my locals there are mostly Mitsu players, and there are like a lot of canine hybrids, and sometimes like very niche rogue decks. For example, I faced a Monarch player, and in these cases, Eternal Darkness was great against like the canines, but they were the trap contract basically did not a lot against the Mitsu matchups, obviously, because Mitsu doesn't care about the extra deck as much. So that was like something that you could adjust. And if you look at my hand traps, I would say the hand traps in themselves they are like a bit more freakish. The reason for that was especially because of the Mitsu matchup. I was mostly afraid of the Mitsu matchup, to be honest, because the deck itself already struggles going second. We know that. This is like a given problem, especially because we know that the card quality per card uh, is varying quite a bit. Like between Doom Queen and Kepler, like it's basically like two worlds, right? Because Kepler really does show its age now. So with that kind of engine, it is really hard to play against like a Raigeki board or like a monster with like Raigeki-esque effects with our deck. So it is really important to have enough of engine pieces that can extend your plays, which is why Count would come in clutch against Mitsu, for example. And generally, when it's like going first, we usually have like a good time, most of the time actually. If they don't play Yummy and open with four hand traps, and in these cases, yeah, that's just the luck of the game, I guess. I mean, if the opponent has it, they have it, right? You can win any match. So yeah.
So before we go into the burst protocol stuff, super quick random question. Is
Yeah.
Spellcard Monster Reborn something that could ever be worth playing in DDD if it were a decent meta call? Like, if it were something that you could use as a non-engine to disrupt your opponent's grave, is that something that you could see as a kind of an extender to fill the gap of that mismatch in card quality?
This is an insane mention because I actually looked into the spell card Monster Reborn for that. I was like actually thinking about it like what if in some format it's becoming a thing? Because honestly, Monster Reborn could help in extending our plays. Obviously, because when we revive something from the grave, even if it gets disrupted, for example, by a ghost spell or something, this is gonna be something strong, even though like our monster effect gets negated. For example, I don't know. Let's say they belt our lance effect to revive from the grave. You can just get it out, and that's awesome. I think it has potential, definitely. To be fair, especially regarding Burst Protocol, I actually theory crafted a lot with Burst Protocol, not only in the usual competitive format, but funnily enough, in the Genesis format. Unbelievable, even without pendulums and links, but it kind of works. It's ridiculous, I know, but like it kind of works. It actually has like some solid 2 and 3 card combos going on, and I hope I can show it to my fans soon enough. But like in these cases, I actually consider it to max out the Monster Reborn. It's kind of a funny and lit card to play. I'm really honest. I love it.
Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about Burst Protocol then. So, I guess the obvious thing is Alfred, but one card that I wanted to ask you about first is the Quadruple D Dimensional King Art Crisis. That
Yes.
card to me, I feel like it looks very strong, but it looks like the kind of card that is going to be in a messy game state. So I was curious in your experience so far, how often does this card actually come up, and how influential is it? Like how impactful on the game state is it when you're successfully able to bring it out?
Honestly, like to be completely honest, Arc Crisis has like a lot of like restrictions because you have to have like what an Xyz, a Synchro, a Fusion, and like a Pendulum at hand, like on the field or in the graveyard or somehow in between, and you have to banish them to get this thing out. And to turbo it out going second, it feels very clunky to be honest. And usually, most of the time when I do it, it's kind of a power move. Um, when I summon it though, it's gonna win the game usually because at that point I've basically baited out everything that the opponent already had, and in these cases they just stare at my shiny cardboard and it feels awesome. The thing with Arc Crisis though is that I think it is a great failsafe if the opponent somehow manages to crack our board going first. But that kind of feels a win more to me because let's be honest, like there are not a lot of times where that actually happens, and then you have to question yourself, like, would have been better to have like a easier going second card to summon, and in these cases, I would say yes. But yeah, like there, like of course, there are like some niche, like ultra niche cases where the opponent just baited out everything that I had, and they spammed like 4 bodies on the board, but somehow I still managed to go into Clovis, Genghis, and Solomon, and then I just turboed one Arc Crisis out to OTK him, and this is really clutch. But these cases don't happen on a regular. So yeah, really mixed about Art Crisis, but I love him. I just love how he just I don't know
Well, he has
how he
crazy
just
aura for
feels when
sure in the artwork.
he has a lot of aura, man. He does have a lot of aura for sure. Like yeah, like yeah, I still have the like I still see the eyes of my opponents when they see Arc Crisis hitting in the field and they ask me what it does, and I was like, yeah, negating your board, it can attack every one of you guys, and with Clovis and Solomon, it does Flaming Man effect and piercing, and they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, so I attack game, and they're like, okay. So I mean, it feels awesome. It feels awesome, not gonna lie. But going second, it's clunky.
Yeah, yeah. Because I was thinking, I don't know if you played a lot of Snake Eyes back when the deck was good, but one of the cool things was having
Yeah,
the option to do the OTK with I forget the name of the Salamangreat Link monster, but being able to just do that super easily was basically a win button. But obviously, it's much easier to
the
do
Raging
that OTK.
Phoenix
Yeah, yeah,
OTK,
yeah.
you
Raging
mean?
Phoenix. Yeah, that's it. With
Yeah, yeah,
Zealantis. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, right, 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 right. That's yeah, that's an automatic button basically. But yeah, that I think that's especially like one of like the main weaknesses of DDDs as well. That even though like I've mentioned it like a lot of times probably already, but like even though we have that support, going second is a struggle, and there's like not a linear combo that you can do to facilitate the Arc Crisis OTK consistently through a lot of different interruptions, which is why there's like a lot of piloting involved to get to Arc Crisis, which might cause a lot of issues.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess that's a little bit unfortunate, but Alfred is almost like a custom card, I feel like. So this is the basically this is the final question. This is where I want to end, which is how does Alfred change the deck? Because the effect is extremely powerful and he's also a level 6. So what do you think about this card? And if you look at the main deck doesn't really seem much different. But in terms of the play style of the deck, how resilient it is, being able to push through stuff, whatever. How do you think of the importance of this card in DDD?
Alfred in itself reads like a custom card, yes, but at the same time, it doesn't fix the most glaring problem, which is going second. So I love Alfred to bits, don't get me wrong. I love him for the fact that he enables us to be even more creative in deck building, because as you can see from my example deck list for Burst Protocol, you don't need to have Orthrus in the main anymore to have enough resilience against a lot of hand traps. You only need the Alfred in the extra deck with like suitable targets. But Alfred itself, he opens up a lot of possibilities in cutting main deck engines or cutting extra deck engines. What I mean by that is, as you can see with Orthrus, Orthrus in itself, if you cut him out from the main deck, other main deck cards can be questioned too, because back then when Orpheus would be main decked regularly, 3 scales would be something that you can strongly argue for, because you can not only play through a lot of hand traps, but a scale plus an Orpheus enables all of your synchro lines, all your main synchro lines, because scale can modulate its level to from 2 to 4. So basically you can go with scale and Orpheus to a Clovis or a Siegfried. That's like awesome synergy. But without Orpheus, your question now becomes like, yeah, well, what do I actually use that level 4 modulation for? Obviously, you can use it to rank into Solomon, but you can already do that with a lot of other cards. So then you can actually declutter more engine cards to put in more non-engine cards, which might help you to combat like another glaring weakness of our deck, which is Fuva. In the example decklist of Burst Protoglass, you can see I have like a lot of trauma built up or pens up against Fuva, because Fuva basically solos our deck. I have like every other hand trap I'm not afraid of, but when it comes down to Fuva and it drops against me when I go first, I for a fact know it's gonna be a rough time. So that's why I like decided to trim down the Orthrus, and I even thought about trimming down the count of scales to 2 so that I could put in more outs to Fuva, because I'm that psychotic about it. And in this case, you have to really cut your losses and ask yourself, well, what am I preparing for again in the format, and what am I expecting to do or play up against? And yeah, all in all, Alfred in itself, awesome addition, but still doesn't fix our going second problem,
Hmm.
sadly.
Is there,
But
by the way, a way
wait,
to play
oh,
through Fu if you drill yourself, or no?
yes, that's perfect. That's actually a very good question. I forgot about that. As you can see from my example deck list in Burst Protocol, I still have a count. Count in itself is great if you intend to self draw. So I've used the draw to self draw myself after having like my count search, like the Copernicus usually, and then I just pop off from there and end on like an almost full board again, which is awesome. And this is usually facilitated with count. Another thing that count adds is more lines that play formidably against Perulia, for example. There's like a line with Alfred, which count enables, where the opponent could double Perulia you or triple Perulia you, I don't care. They basically just hand loop themselves for 3, because you won't give them any draws, but you still end on almost full board. And that's only made possible because the count enables it. So yeah, I think count in this case earns a spot rather than Orthrus, which is insane to think about.
Okay. Well, I feel like the overall takeaway to me, if I'm just trying to think about the theory of DDD based on what you've said so far, is aside from the issues with going second, there is a card quality issue where many of the cards are not up to scratch compared to current meta decks, but the existence of Alfred at least somewhat alleviates that because you can remove some engine requirements from your deck. That's one of the things that White Forest, which is my favorite deck, struggles with, is you have to play a bunch of engine requirements, and if you don't, your deck will be substantially worse. So I feel like even if you can reduce that number of engine requirements by a small amount, that's a decent step forward. And because you already have a lot of non-engine space, if you could have a really good meta call for your non-engine, I guess you could still have a pretty decent deck in the room. I Is there anything else that you feel like we've missed going over this like deck theory or DDD as we wrap up here? Any final thoughts you have?
One final thought is, guys, Genesis is not over. Trust me. Alfred does fix some things. Unbelievable, I know. I thought it would not be possible, but like in my theory crafting chamber that I disappeared in the last couple of months, I actually noticed that Alfred does do something so that we can still end on something with like 2 card combos, even with like way older cards, like even older than Kepler, I think. And that's pretty cool to do. And I just want to try out Genesis as well. So why not? We have to join the ranks, guys. That's something that I want to tell the people, I guess.
Well, I'll be very curious to see that. There'll be a link and everything to your channel in the description, and I definitely want to watch that video when it comes out because White Forest, like for people that cope on decks that are like almost good, if they just had 1 or 2 other cards, White Forest is also one of those, and so Genesis is a place a lot of people test there too. So okay, that
Yeah.
was great.
No, I
Thank
get
you
it.
for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Was a great interview and a great opportunity.
If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you have any other suggestions for collaborations, please let me know in the comments below. And if you would like to join the Discord, where I am still somewhat active and you can at me with any questions you may have, and there's a very active community of people who are playtesting and love deck theory and deck building, then the link will be in the description below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.